The phone call came during my shift at Rossini's, right after the dinner rush. I was clearing table 6, a party of 4 who'd left crumbs scattered like confession, when I saw Liliana's school on my screen. My hand went cold. "Miss Romano?" The school nurse's voice was tight, careful. The tone adults use when they're about to break something you can't put back together. Yes, this is she. I moved into the kitchen's back hallway, away from the clatter of plates and the voice of Chef Matteo shouting orders. "Liliana fell during recess. She says her back hurts. We've called an ambulance as a precaution. Can you meet us at Street Catherine's?" The world went quiet. Not silent quiet in that specific way, where everything loud becomes muffled, like you're underwater and the surface is miles away. "I'm coming now." I found her in the emergency room, small on a gurney, her 9-year-old body looking even smaller beneath white hospital sheets. She was crying. Liliana never cried. She had my stubbornness, my refusal to let the world see her break. But here she was, breaking. "Mama," she whispered. I took her hand like it was the most fragile thing I'd ever held. The imaging came back 2 hours later. The doctor, a woman with gray streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had delivered bad news too many times, explained it in careful language that, stripped down, meant, "Your daughter's spine has a compression fracture, congenital weakness. The fall aggravated it, without surgery, chronic pain, possible neurological complications, possible paralysis. The surgery is urgent," she said. "Not emergency room urgent, but within the next 4 to 6 weeks. How much?" My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The procedure itself, imaging, pre-op, anesthesia, post-operative care, approximately $80,000. I laughed. Actually laughed. It came out wrong, sharp and bitter, like glass breaking inside my throat. My insurance covered 60%, maybe. I had $12,000 in savings. $12,000 that was supposed to cover rent, food, Liliana's school fees. $12,000 that was supposed to last us until I could move from waitressing to the restaurant's management track. $80,000. I sat there for a long time, holding my daughter's small hand, watching her try not to cry because she thought I was strong enough to cry for both of us. I wasn't. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I picked up extra shifts at Rossini's, even though my feet felt like they belonged to someone who'd been running for days. I called hospitals, insurance companies, foundations. I researched payment plans. I looked into going back to school so I could make more money, but that felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I was drowning, and drowning quietly, because that's what you do when you have a child who depends on you. Then he came in. Vittorio Russo arrived at Rossini's on a Thursday night, alone, moving through the restaurant, the way water moves through a room, inevitable and utterly in control. I didn't know who he was then. I just knew that Marco, the maitre d', suddenly stood straighter, and that Chef Matteo emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron like it mattered. He sat at table 1, the best table, corner position, view of the entire restaurant, and the street beyond. Of course he did. I wasn't assigned to him. Francesca was. A seasoned server with the kind of ease in her body that comes from being beautiful and knowing it. But when she approached his table, he glanced up, and something in his expression shifted. Just barely. Just enough. "Enza," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, a voice that had never needed to be loud because the world already listened when he spoke. "I'll take her instead." Francesca's face flushed. Marco's jaw tightened. I was arranging bread baskets across the dining room and pretended I didn't hear, but my hands went still anyway. "Of course, Mr. Russo," Marco said, which meant I knew his name now. I walked over. Every step felt heavier than it should. He was perhaps 40, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with the kind of face that made you forget your own thoughts. Not beautiful, not exactly, but there was something about him that drew attention the way a flame draws moths. Quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because it's written into the way he sat, the way his hand rested on the table, the way his eyes moved over the room like he was counting resources. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady in that way you learn in hospitality, the voice that protects you from yourself. "What can I start you with?" "Campari and soda," he said. "And tell me what's good tonight, Bella." The Italian wasn't condescending. It was casual, intimate in a way that made my skin feel too warm. I hated it. I was too tired for whatever this was. The branzino is fresh. The pasta is Chef Matteo's grandmother's recipe. Then I'll have the branzino and a glass of Barolo. He paused, studying me in a way that felt deliberate and dangerous. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. I didn't know how to respond to that kind of honesty from a stranger, so I didn't. I'll get your drink started. Service with him was strange. Every time I approached his table, he watched me with a kind of focused attention that made the other server's eyes narrow. He didn't flirt, that was the strangest part. He was courteous, quiet, and somehow more intimidating because of it. By the time I brought his espresso, I could feel the restaurant's energy shifting around him like water around a stone. When he was done, he gestured me over while Francesca tried not to look like she wanted to stab me with a bread knife. Your daughter, he said. Not a question. A statement. My entire body went rigid. I'm sorry? You have a child. His eyes were so dark they looked black in the restaurant's golden light. You wear a wedding ring on a chain beneath your shirt. You check your phone every 7 minutes during a double shift. You cut your own hair to save money. You have a daughter. I was breathing, but it felt like I was learning how to do it. That's how could you... I stopped. I found something that felt close to composure. My family isn't your concern. No, he agreed. It isn't. Yet. The word yet hung between us like a blade suspended in air. He stood, towering in a way that made me understand why Marco and Matteo had straightened their spines. He pulled out his wallet and placed a credit card on the table. And then, low enough that only I could hear, your daughter. What's her name? Liliana. Something flickered across his face, not softness, but a kind of recognition, like he'd found something he didn't know he was looking for. He left no tip. 4 days later, at the end of another exhausting shift, Marco pulled me aside. Mr. Russo called, he said, handing me an envelope, thick with paper. He said you'd know what it was for. He said to tell you. Marco's eyes were uncomfortable, looking everywhere but at me. He said to tell you the surgery is handled. My hands wouldn't open the envelope. I just stared at it, white and ordinary and impossible. What does that mean? But I knew. God, I knew. I opened it anyway. Medical discharge forms. Surgical authorization. A letter from St. Catherine's Hospital confirming that all outstanding balances on Liliana's account had been cleared. All of them. Paid in full. 8 years of my daughter's life, secured in a single envelope. The room tilted. How much? I whispered. Marco looked away. All of it, I think. He handled it personally. I've never seen him do that before. He doesn't usually interfere. As if my daughter's life, my desperation, my terror, had been something he could simply buy his way into, the way someone buys a meal or a view. I sat down right there on the kitchen floor, the envelope still in my shaking hands, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I let myself cry. But underneath the relief, underneath the gratitude, and the crushing weight lifting just slightly, there was something else. A thread of fear, a thread of something that felt, terrifyingly, like obligation. A thread that pulled toward a man who could remake someone's entire life with a single phone call, who had paid for my daughter's survival, and who clearly expected something in return, even if he hadn't said it yet, even if I didn't know what. Liliana's surgery was scheduled for the following month. The pre-op appointments filled my calendar, like small victories, each one a step toward her being safe, toward the compression fracture being corrected, toward her running again without my heart stopping. I was terrified, grateful, and trapped in a way I couldn't articulate to anyone, because I knew what this was. Maybe not the specifics, maybe not what he'd ultimately want, but I understood the mathematics of his kindness. Nothing costs what Liliana's surgery cost without expecting a return. Nothing. Certainly not from a man like him. Vittor Russo owned pieces of half the city. Not in the way people know about or advertise, but in the way that Marco mentioned, offhanded and nervous, that Mr. Russo has interests in the marina, in the import business, in certain insurance firms. The way that Chef Matteo mentioned Russo's family had been here since before Italy had borders, before the word mafia was even in the dictionary. The way that when Russo was in the restaurant, everyone moved differently. He came back 3 nights after I'd received the envelope. I knew he would. I'd changed my hair, that detail about him noticing everything had burrowed under my skin. I wore makeup. My uniform was perfect. I was a waitress, playing a waitress, careful not to spill over the edges of the role I'd been cast in. He ordered the same thing. Campari and soda, Branzino, Barolo. How is she? His voice was casual. A man asking about the weather. She's good. She's scared, but she's good. The surgery is in 3 weeks. He nodded, cutting into his fish with the kind of precision that suggested he did everything with that level of control. You haven't thanked me. I'd written thank you cards. I'd written a dozen of them in my apartment at 2 a.m, each one worse than the last. How do you thank someone for saving your child's life? How do you thank someone who's done it with such casual power that it makes you feel small and terrifyingly visible all at once? I'm thanking you now, I said carefully. No, you're being polite. There's a difference. He looked at me directly, and I remembered why I'd been unsettled when he first walked in. His eyes were the color of burnt sugar, dark but warm, if warmth could be dangerous. I paid for your daughter's surgery because I wanted to, not because I expected gratitude. Not because I wanted to own you, Enza. I did it because I could, and because the moment I saw your face, I decided I didn't want your child to suffer if it was in my power to prevent it. It was the longest thing he'd said to me. It was also a lie. A beautiful lie, perfectly constructed, and I couldn't afford not to believe it. Thank you, I said softly. Better. He paused. Tell me about her. Liliana, not as a patient, as a person. And I did. I found myself talking about her precision, her stubbornness, the way she corrected me when I misquoted her favorite books. I talked about her drawing's elaborate architectural plans for houses that didn't exist, schools with libraries on every floor. I talked until the dinner rush started and I had to step away, and when I came back, he was gone. He'd paid with cash, a $100 bill beneath his espresso cup. The restaurant began to feel like a stage set for something I was only half aware of. Vittore came in twice a week, always alone, always at table 1, always asking for me. Marco noticed. Francesca noticed. The other servers whispered in the kitchen about whether I was sleeping with him, and my skin burned every time, but I couldn't correct them because I didn't understand what was happening either. What I understood was the danger. It lived in the careful spaces around him, the way certain conversations would stop when he arrived. The way a man came in once, saw Vittore, and immediately left without ordering. It lived in the phone calls he'd take in the restaurant, stepping into the private dining room, his voice never changing but something in the other person's responses making it clear they were terrified. It lived in the fact that he had paid $80,000 for a child he'd met once. I was arranging table decorations between shifts when I saw the news on a break room television. An indictment of 3 men involved in alleged organized crime activities. Their photographs scrolled across the screen, hard-faced men who looked exactly like they were involved in organized crime. The voiceover was carefully neutral. One suspect remains at large, the anchor said. It wasn't Vittore. Somehow, I was certain of that. He wasn't the kind of man who ran. He was the kind of man the others ran from. That's who he is, Francesca said from the doorway, watching the screen. She looked at me the way people look at someone standing too close to an edge. Mr. Russo. That's the world he's in. He's not. He's exactly that. She crossed her arms. My cousin works in financial crimes. She says Russo's family runs half the waterfront. She says he's dangerous in a way that doesn't make the news because he's too smart to get caught. And she said... Francesca paused, like she was deciding whether to be kind. She said he doesn't collect people like you. Not unless he's serious. Serious about what? But Francesca didn't answer. She just left me there, in the break room, staring at the television where a photograph of Vittore Russo appeared, professional headshot, completely innocent, in connection with an ongoing investigation. Vittore point of view. He'd known about the girl's surgery before Enza had the nerve to ask. He had people in every hospital in the city, people who fed him information like currency. A single phone call. And he knew her daughter's name, her diagnosis, the cost of the procedure that would fix the things her mother couldn't. He'd paid it without hesitation because watching Enza work herself into exhaustion was unbearable, and Vittori didn't believe in bearing unbearable things. He moved them out of the way. The girl was 9 years old, with her mother's wide eyes and a spine that had been weakened by a genetic flaw he could have tracked through 3 generations if he'd wanted. He'd seen a photograph Liliana, dark-haired, serious-faced, the kind of child who understood too much, too young. He'd seen that, and made a decision with the same certainty he made all his decisions. This child would not suffer if he could prevent it. His father would have called him weak. His uncle would have laughed, but his father was long dead, and Vittori had learned to make his own rules. The problem was Enza. She moved through the restaurant like a ghost, translucent and haunted, and he found himself watching her the way a collector watches a piece he can't quite acquire. The wedding ring on a chain, her mother's, he'd learned through careful questioning of Marco, meant she was alone and had been for years. The way she held the dinner tray suggested she carried the weight of everything alone. He wanted to stop that. More dangerous. He wanted her to let him. Vittori had built his empire on understanding people, on seeing what they wanted before they understood it themselves. With Enza, it was simple. She wanted her daughter safe. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to matter to someone who had the power to keep her safe. He could give her all of that. But she was skittish, a fawn learning to trust a hand extended through the dark. He had to be patient. Patient in a way that came naturally to him because he'd learned, years ago, that urgency was a trap that caught only desperate men. And Vittori Russo had never been desperate. Yet, Liliana's surgery came on a Tuesday in early April. I'd taken the day off, one of the few I'd allowed myself in the past month. She was sedated, wheeled away into an operating room that smelled like antiseptic and hope, and I sat in the waiting room with my hands folded in my lap, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. When the doors opened and Vittori walked in dressed in dark clothes, carrying 2 cups of coffee, I wasn't even surprised. I was too terrified to be surprised. "How long?" he asked, sitting beside me without asking permission. 6 hours, maybe 7. He set a coffee in my hands and sat back, and we waited together in silence. It was the first time I'd felt safe in weeks. Not the absence of danger. Vittori's presence made danger more real, more tangible, like standing next to a coiled rope that could tighten at any moment. But safe in the sense that I wasn't alone. The surgery took 5 hours. When the doctor came out, her face was calm, and I knew before she even spoke. "She's fine. The compression is corrected. No nerve damage. She'll be in recovery in about an hour." I cried again the 3rd time in a month. I was becoming someone who cried, and I wasn't sure if that was something to mourn or celebrate. Vittori reached over and took my hand. Just that. Held it while my entire body released 3 months of terror that had been coiled in my chest. When I'd composed myself enough to speak, I asked, "Why did you do this?" "I told you. I could, and I wanted to." "That's not an answer." He turned to look at me fully, and for the first time, I saw something beneath the control. Something that looked, disturbingly, like longing. "Because watching you suffer was intolerable," he said quietly. "Because your daughter reminds me of myself at that age, determined, alone, trying to be strong for someone who couldn't protect her. And because the moment I decided to pay for her surgery, everything became clear." Clear about what? About what I wanted. He was still holding my hand. I should have pulled away. The sensible part of me, the part that had whispered about danger since that first night in the restaurant, was screaming to pull away. I didn't. "Vittori, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. But I need you to understand that I don't do anything without knowing the outcome. I've already calculated the weight of this. I've already decided it's worth the cost." "What's the cost?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Your trust," he said. "Eventually, completely, irrevocably. That's all I'm asking for." It was the most terrifying and most compelling thing anyone had ever said to me. When they let me see Liliana, she was waking up, confused and brave, and I held her hand and promised myself I would figure out how to exist in this new world I'd somehow stepped into. A world where a man had bought my debt with money, and now wanted to collect it in something far more valuable. My heart. Liliana was home within 3 days, her back wrapped in a brace, her eyes bright with pain medication, and the particular joy of a child who'd survived something that felt, to her 9-year-old mind, like a battle. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she understood that she could move without pain for the first time in months. That was enough. What wasn't enough was pretending I didn't know Vittore had changed my daughter's entire future. "Can I meet him?" Liliana asked on the fourth day home, as I was helping her to the couch with the careful precision of a mother who was terrified of re-injuring a freshly repaired child. "Who?" "The man." "Mama, I heard you on the phone. I heard you say his name. He paid for my surgery, didn't he?" There was no point in lying to a 9-year-old architect of truth. "Yes, he did." "Is he like Papa?" My father had died when I was 19, before Liliana was born. I carried him around like a ghost in my chest. His kindness, his certainty, his ability to make people feel seen. "No," I said softly. "He's not like your grandfather. He's different." "Is he nice?" That was a harder question. "I think he's trying to be," I said finally. Vittore called me 3 days later, his voice carrying the particular calm of someone used to being obeyed. "Bring Liliana to dinner. Saturday, 7 o'clock. I'm closing Rossini's at 6. It will be private." "That's not Vittore. You can't just—" "I can. I will. She's curious about me. I'm curious about her. What's the harm in dinner?" The harm was everything. The harm was that I was already indebted to him, already struggling against an attraction that felt like drowning slowly. The harm was that my daughter would see him and understand, with the clarity of children, exactly what he meant to me. "Okay," I said. Saturday came gray and cold, the kind of spring day that threatened rain but never quite delivered. Liliana wore a dress I'd made her navy blue. Simple, the kind of thing a child who wasn't quite confident enough to stand out wore to important occasions. I wore a dress too. Black, elegant, and the first thing I'd owned in 5 years that wasn't from the discount bin at department stores. Rossini's was transformed when we arrived. Empty, but not lonely, every candlelit table was set with flowers, with care, with the kind of attention that made it clear this wasn't about dinner. It was about showing us something. Vittore was waiting, and when he saw Liliana, something happened to his face, a softening, a kind of wonder that seemed entirely genuine. "Liliana," he said, kneeling so he was at eye level with her. "I'm Vittore. I've wanted to meet you for a very long time. Are you the man who paid for my surgery?" she asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I am." "Why?" "Because your mother is important to me, and you're important to her, and because I could." He paused. "Does your back feel better?" "It doesn't hurt anymore," Liliana said solemnly. "But I have to do physical therapy. It's boring. Physical therapy is the price of freedom," Vittore said. "Worth paying?" She considered this with a seriousness that made me love her even more. "Yes," she decided. "I want to run." Chef Matteo emerged from the kitchen with Liliana's favorite pasta. He'd somehow known what it was, which suggested Vittore had asked him. She ate with the appetite of a child healing, her back straight despite the brace, her eyes watching Vittore with a child's particular intelligence. "Your mother says you design buildings," Vittore said. Liliana's entire face brightened. For 2 hours, she talked about her designs, the school with the library on every floor, the hospital with gardens that connected every department, the house that would have a room for every season. Vittore listened the way people actually listened, with questions that were thoughtful, with responses that built on what she was saying rather than redirecting the conversation. I watched them, and something inside my chest clenched. It was dangerous, this kindness. More dangerous than if he'd been cruel, because cruelty I could have fought. This tenderness toward my daughter was something I had no defense against. After dinner, Vittore walked us to his car. It was a Rolls-Royce, the kind of vehicle that existed in a different world than mine. He helped Liliana into the back seat with the care he might have shown a piece of spun glass. "Thank you," Liliana said, with a solemnity that was entirely her own. "For everything." "You're welcome," Vittore said. "Will you do me a favor?" "What?" "Will you promise to work hard on your physical therapy, and promise that you'll keep designing? Because I have a feeling you're going to build something remarkable," she promised. Of course she promised. On the drive home, Liliana fell asleep against the window, her small face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. "Don't do this," I said quietly. "Do what?" "Make her love you. Don't do that to her." Vittor's hands were steady on the steering wheel, his profile carved from stone and intention. I'm not making her love me. I'm being kind to her. That's different. Not in my world, it isn't. In my world, kindness is currency, and it only ever comes with a bill attached. He pulled the car over on a quiet street in the neighborhoods, where the houses weren't the ones you dreamed about, but the ones you could actually afford. I want to tell you something, he said, turning to face me fully. I'm going to tell you what I want from you, because I think you're intelligent enough to understand it, and I think you're brave enough to hear it. My heart was thunder in my throat. I want you, he said. Not your gratitude, not your obligation, not your body, though, eventually. Yes, that too. I want you to choose me, to look at me, and decide that despite everything you know about what I am, despite the danger, despite the moral compromises that come with my life, I'm worth the risk. I can't. You can. You're already deciding. Every time you speak to me, every time you let me near your daughter, you're deciding. The only question is whether you'll be honest about it, or whether you'll hide behind the fiction that I've trapped you. You have trapped me. You paid $80,000. I paid for your daughter's medical care. That's not a trap. That's a gift. And gifts don't buy loyalty, they only buy opportunity. He reached out and touched my face, his hand warm against my cheek, and I didn't pull away. The opportunity to prove that I'm not the monster you think I am. That I'm just a man who's built a life in darkness and found you, and decided that maybe you could be a reason to step toward light. That's beautiful, I whispered. And terrifying. Yes, he agreed. All the best things are. Vittori point of view. Watching Enza with her daughter had been like watching someone finally understand a proof they'd been laboring over for months. The connection was sacred, untouchable, the kind of love that required him to be careful in a way he was careful about nothing else. He'd meant what he said. He didn't want to trap her. He wanted, with an intensity that surprised him, for her to choose him knowing exactly what that choice entailed. It made him vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since he was young enough to believe in things like innocence. But there was a problem, and it had arrived in the form of a phone call that afternoon, just as he was preparing to close Rossini's. Russo. His uncle Matteo had said not the chef, but his mother's brother, the man who managed the Russo family's interests in the Southern Territories. We have a situation. The situation, it turned out, was the Calabrese family. They'd been encroaching on Russo territory for months, small movements, testing boundaries like predators testing a fence. But they'd finally made a play that was too large to ignore. They'd gone after one of Vittori's accounts managers, tried to flip him to their side with money and threats in equal measure. The man had resisted. The man had also, inexplicably, survived. But it was a line drawn, a gauntlet thrown. Handle it, Vittori had said, which was the language his family understood, the language that required no translation. He would handle it. He would be elegant and careful and absolutely thorough. And when he was done, the Calabrese family would understand that there were territories they didn't touch, families they didn't approach, and Vittor Russo was not a man who took encroachment lightly. But first, he would have to become, for a time, the man Enzo was terrified of. The man without the kindness, without the softness he reserved for her. He thought about her as he made the calls that would set everything in motion, her hands shaking as she set down wine glasses, her eyes watching him with hunger and fear in equal measure, her daughter's voice asking if he was like her grandfather. He was not like her grandfather. He was something darker, something that required a constant negotiation with his own worst impulses. But for her, he would try to be better, even if it meant being worse first. Everything changed the day that the news broke about the Calabrese family. A rival faction, a power play, a shipment of something illegal going missing. The details were murky, filtered through the city's usual channels of gossip and speculation, but the outcome was clear. Someone had died. Two someones, actually, and a warehouse in the southern part of the city was nothing but rubble and police tape. I learned about it from Francesca, who'd learned about it from her cousin in financial crimes. They're saying it's the Calabrese family and Mr. Russo, she said, her eyes averted, which meant she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. They're saying there was an attempt on one of his people, and he responded by burning their entire operation down. The restaurant felt suddenly very small, very quiet. very much like the moment before something catastrophic happens. I'd known, abstractly, that Vittorio was dangerous. I'd seen it in the way people moved around him, in the way his phone calls made other men's voices shake. But knowing something intellectually and watching it execute itself in real time were different things entirely. He didn't come to his usual table that night, Marco had said, and the omission felt like a confession. 5 days passed. 5 days of not seeing him, of imagining him doing unspeakable things, of wondering if the man who'd held my hand while my daughter was in surgery was the same man who'd reduced a rival family's operations to ashes. Liliana asked about him on day 4. "Is Vittor coming to dinner?" she asked, swinging her legs from the kitchen counter where I'd set her while preparing dinner. "I don't know. Will he come back?" That was the question, wasn't it? Not if, but will he come back to me? As if absence was a kind of betrayal. As if his dangerous business was a choice he was making, instead of something that chose him. "He'll come back," I said, and I meant it as a promise, though I had no authority to make one. He did come back, but he was different. The man who walked into Rossini's was the same man, but with something essential stripped away. The kindness was gone. In its place was something colder, something that moved with absolute purpose. When he looked at me, I could see the machinery of his ambition, the calculation of his power, the knowledge that he was a man capable of things most people couldn't fathom. He gestured me into the private dining room. My hands were trembling. I held them still by force of will. "I need you to understand something," he said, and his voice was gentle, but it carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "I am not a safe man, and I have just done things that were not safe. There are people who want me dead, and by extension, there are people who would use you and your daughter to reach me. I know. Do you?" He stepped closer. "Because understanding something intellectually and comprehending it in your body are very different things. You need to comprehend this. Being with me comes with real danger. I understand. You don't." There was something almost sad in his voice. "But you will, which is why I'm going to do something now that I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to give you a choice to leave." My heart stopped. Actually stopped, as if his words had somehow disrupted my ability to function. "What?" "I paid for your daughter's surgery. I can arrange for you and Liliana to disappear. New identities, new city, new life. I have the resources. I could set you both up so that you'd never have to work in a restaurant again, never have to struggle. You could have safety. Without you," I said. "Yes, without me, without the danger, without the knowledge of what I am, and what I've done, and what I will do again when necessary." He was really offering this. He was really giving me a way out. And it was the kindest and cruelest thing he could have possibly done. "If I leave," I said carefully, "can you guarantee that the danger will end? Can you guarantee that Liliana will be safe?" "As much as anyone can guarantee anything, yes. I have resources in place, contingencies. She would be protected. And if I stay," he was quiet for a long time, "if you stay, you'll be in danger. Real danger. You'll hear about violence and know that it was necessary. You'll see me with blood on my hands, metaphorical and possibly literal. You'll understand things about me that will make you question whether you've made a terrible mistake." But there had to be a but, because he was still asking me to choose. "But," he continued, "you'll also be closer to me than anyone has ever been. You'll understand me completely, without the filters of ignorance to soften your knowledge. And I promise you that no one will ever hurt you or your daughter while I'm alive to prevent it. That's not contingency. That's not calculation. That's a promise that goes beyond strategy." I thought of Liliana, asking if he was like her grandfather. I thought of her face when he'd told her she was going to build something remarkable. I thought of the surgery, the pain before it, the freedom after. "I stay," I said. "Don't decide tonight." "I'm not deciding tonight. I'm telling you what I've already decided. I stay. We stay. Whatever the cost is, whatever the danger, we stay." He reached out and pulled me against him, and I felt him shake just barely, just for a moment, like something inside him had finally released a breath it had been holding. "You're braver than I am," he said into my hair. "No," I said. "I'm just more frightened. I'm more frightened of losing you than I am of whatever danger comes with having you." He held me there in that private dining room, in the restaurant where I'd first seen him, and I understood that something inside me had broken and reformed around him, that I was no longer a woman who'd been trapped, but a woman who'd chosen her own cage, knowing exactly how solid the bars were. It was the most terrifying and most complete surrender I'd ever made. The safest place for me, Vittoria decided, was with him. This was presented not as a request, but as a necessity, a temporary arrangement while the Calabrese situation stabilized, which I now understood was organized crime code for, until nobody wants to assassinate him. Liliana would stay with my mother upstate until things were secure, and I would stay at his home. The thought of being separated from my daughter, even temporarily, made me want to refuse. But Vittoria was right. Whoever wanted to reach him would look for me and use me. Liliana was safer away from me than with me, at least for now. It was a logic I hated but couldn't argue with. His home was not what I expected. I'd imagined something ostentatious, a monument to wealth and power, all marble and crystal and deliberate intimidation. Instead, it was a brownstone in a quiet corner of the city, where old money lived without advertising itself. Inside, it was refined and warm, filled with books and art that suggested he'd built his taste deliberately, with attention and care. "This was my mother's," he said, showing me a painting, a landscape of somewhere Mediterranean and warm. "She had impeccable taste. I've tried to preserve it." "Where is she?" I asked. "Dead. 20 years now. Heart attack at 53. Something crossed his face, not sadness exactly, but the ghost of it. "She would have liked you." I moved through the house like a ghost, aware of every expensive thing I might break, every boundary I might cross. Vittoria had given me a room on the second-floor guest room. Large bed, private bathroom, respectable. Which made the situation somehow more complicated because it meant he wasn't assuming I'd share his bed, wasn't treating me like a possession, already claimed. That first night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Liliana upstate, about my apartment, with its thin walls and windows that needed weather stripping, about the life I'd left suspended behind me. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to the kitchen, thinking I might make tea. I found Vittoria there instead, in a dark suit despite the hour, working at a laptop with the kind of focus that suggested the business of his empire didn't stop for human rhythms like night and day. "Can't sleep?" he asked, not looking up. "No, Liliana. That, and this." I gestured around the kitchen, at the wealth implied by every expensive appliance, every piece of proper furniture. "I don't know how to exist in this. I don't know what I'm supposed to be." He closed the laptop and finally looked at me. What I'd expected to see was calculation, assessment, the look of someone figuring out what use to make of me. What I saw instead was loneliness, deep, fundamental loneliness that echoed off the walls of this beautiful empty house. "You're supposed to be exactly what you are," he said. "Can you do that? Can you be exactly yourself, without performing?" "I don't know how." "Then we'll figure it out." He stood and moved to the kitchen island, and I realized he was making tea, his movements efficient and practiced. "Sit. I'll make you something. There's a process to good tea. You have to be patient. You have to wait." We sat in that kitchen for 2 hours, and he talked about his mother, about growing up in this house, about how she'd insisted he learn to cook because she said, "A man who can't feed himself properly is a man who's lost some essential part of his humanity." He talked about his father, who'd died when Vittoria was young, and how his uncle had wanted to raise him toward violence and power, but his mother had insisted on music, art, languages. "I learned to be two people," he said. "The person my mother wanted me to be, and the person my family needed me to be. For a long time, I thought they couldn't coexist. Now I'm beginning to think they must. The person I was raised to be, and the person I've become, they have to find some way to exist together, or I'll destroy myself. Is that what I'm for?" The question came out before I could stop it. "To help you be the person your mother wanted?" "No," he said. "You're not a redemption narrative, Enza. You're not here to save me or soften my edges. I'm asking you to see both versions of me and decide if you can live with them as one person. Can you?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was with the kind of honesty that felt dangerous. "I'm learning to," With you, I'm learning to. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. I would wake in that quiet house and find him already working, or already gone. I would read in the library, a room that extended 2 full stories, lined with books in multiple languages, suggesting a mind that was endlessly hungry. I would move through the space carefully, as if I was negotiating a treaty with the house itself. But there were moments of intimacy that had nothing to do with bodies. He taught me how to play chess on the 3rd night, his hands guiding mine with a gentleness that made my skin feel electric. On the 4th day, he took me to a gallery opening, his hand on the small of my back, and I realized that people knew me, not my face specifically, but my role the woman Vittorio Russo was publicly attached to. I could see them calculating, assessing, trying to determine if I was worth approaching, or if my association with him made me dangerous. I was beginning to understand how his power worked. It wasn't just money or violence, it was presence. He filled a room the way water fills a space inescapably, completely, reshaping the landscape of it. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked on the 5th night, as we were sitting in his study. Me with a book I wasn't reading, him with work that required his attention. "Yes," I said, "but you're staying." "I'm staying." "Why?" I closed my book and looked at him. He was waiting for this answer the way someone waits for something essential. Because fear and love aren't opposites. They're the same feeling, depending on whether you're running toward something or away from it. And I'm not running away from you anymore. He stood and crossed the room, and for a moment I thought he would touch me. Instead, he went to the window and looked out at the city, his profile etched in shadow. "You should be running," he said quietly. "Maybe," I agreed. "But I'm not." It happened on a Friday night, in the rain. I'd been at the house for nearly 2 weeks when the call came, one of his men, voice tight with the particular urgency that suggested bad news. Vittorio took it in his study, and I could hear the measured calm of his responses, the way he was processing information while giving nothing away. When he came out, something had shifted in him. The carefully maintained lightness was gone. "I need to go out," he said. "Now? It's nearly midnight." "Yes." I knew not to ask questions. I was learning the language of his life, the things that could be discussed, and the things that existed in the categories marked "don't ask." But something in my chest was screaming that this was different, that this was the darkness he'd warned me about materializing into something real. "Will you be safe?" I asked. "No," he said. "But I'll be careful. That's the best I can offer." He was leaving to do something violent or dangerous, or both. He was leaving me in this house, surrounded by his life, surrounded by the knowledge that the man I was falling in love with was also a man capable of things that required him to slip away into the rain at midnight. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know. Could be hours. Could be longer." He kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt like goodbye, and left me there. I didn't sleep. I sat in his library with the lights off and the rain hammering against the windows, imagining all the ways he could be hurt, all the ways he could hurt others, all the ways this could end. By 3 in the morning, I was crying not the clean tears of before, but the messy, terrified crying of someone who'd let themselves love someone truly dangerous. He came back at dawn, wet and exhausted, with blood on his shirt sleeve. "Don't," he said, when I moved toward him. "It's not mine. Mostly. Give me a moment." He cleaned himself up thorough, methodical, and when he came back, he was in a fresh shirt, and the careful control had been restored. But underneath it, I could see the fracture, the exhaustion, the weight of whatever he'd done. "Sit with me," I said, not asked. He sat, and I took his hand. And for a long time we just existed in the same space, breathing the same air, not speaking because there was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish what needed to exist between us. "I ordered it," he said finally. His voice was hollow. "A man who worked for the Calabrese family. He was responsible for sending people to hurt one of mine. I ordered it, and it was done, and now he's dead because I decided he should be." "You did it to protect people," I said. "I did it because I have the power to do it, and I can't tolerate disrespect. There's a difference." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were ancient. "This is what I am, Enza, not theoretical danger. This, the actual weight of causing someone's death, The blood that gets on you even when it's not on your hands. I know. Do you? His voice was sharp. Do you actually know? Or are you performing acceptance of something you can't actually comprehend? Probably performing, I admitted. But the acceptance underneath is real. I'm terrified of you, and I love you, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Those things are all true at the same time. He made a sound like something breaking. I don't deserve that, he said. No, I agreed. You probably don't, but you're getting it anyway. He pulled me against him, and I could feel his heart hammering in his chest, could feel the tremor in his body as he finally let himself be something other than composed. I've been alone so long, he whispered against my hair. I don't know how to have this. How to let you see this and not disappear. I'm not going to disappear. You might. You will if you're smart. Then it's good I'm not very smart, I said, and felt him laugh, a broken, desperate sound that was the most honest thing I'd heard from him. Vittere point of view. She loved him. She loved him knowing exactly what he was. She loved him with the man's blood literally on his conscience, with the weight of his decision still fresh, with the reality of his violence still steaming in the rain. It was the most erotic and terrifying thing Vittori had ever experienced. He wanted her. God, he wanted her. It had been building for weeks, the restraint required to have her in his house, to watch her move through his spaces, to know that she was choosing him while maintaining distance because he respected her enough not to assume possession. But now that he'd shown her the darkest parts of himself and she hadn't run everything in him, was screaming to claim her, to make it physical, tangible, undeniable. He held her in the darkness of his study, and every cell of his body wanted to take her upstairs, to make her his in a way that went beyond words and choices and promises. Instead, he held her and let himself be held, and understood that this surrender to her was the most dangerous thing he'd ever allowed himself to experience. Because once he let her into his bed, once he made her physically his, there would be no going back. She would become, irrevocably, part of his empire, his power structure, his immortality. She would become a liability, and he would become, if anything happened to her, fully capable of burning the entire world to the ground. He was almost there already. Another day of her choosing him, and he would cross that line completely. Vittori recognized the precipice. He'd been standing on it for 2 weeks, pretending he could step back. Now he understood that he couldn't. He could only move forward, pull her with him, and hope that love was strong enough to survive what came next. A week later, when I'd finally accepted that my mother would keep Liliana safe upstate for as long as it took, when the immediate danger had settled into something like a stalemate, when the house had become less a prison and more a sanctuary, he came to my room. I'd been reading another book I wasn't absorbing when the knock came. I knew it was him. I'd learned to recognize the particular weight of his presence, even through a door. "Come in," I said, and my heart was suddenly everywhere in my throat, my hands, the place between my legs where I felt him most intensely. He entered without ceremony, still dressed from his day, still carrying that controlled energy that made the air feel charged. He stood at the threshold for a moment, looking at me the way he might look at something sacred and terrifying. "I'm going to say this once," he said, "and then you're going to have the choice to stop me or let me continue. Are you listening?" I nodded. I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. "I want you. Not gently, not with restraint. I want to touch you until you can't remember how to be a separate person from me. I want to make you feel things that terrify you. I want to know every part of your body and every part of your mind. But I need to know that you want it too, not because you're grateful, not because you're obligated, but because you're as desperate as I am." My entire body was trembling. I could feel wetness gathering in the center of me, could feel my nipples hardening against the soft fabric of the shirt I was wearing. "I do," I whispered. "Say it again, louder." "I want you," I said, and it came out shaky, uncertain. "Louder, Bella. I need to hear you." "I want you," I said again, stronger this time. He crossed the room in 2 strides and kissed me, not the careful, controlled kisses I'd imagined, but something that tasted like claiming, like hunger, like the end of his restraint. I made a small sound against his mouth, and he pulled back just slightly. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Tell me if you need me to stop. Tell me anything, and I stop. Understood?" Understood. Then he was kissing me again, and his hands were in my hair, tangling there, pulling my head back so he could have access to my throat. I felt his mouth there warm, insistent, and I couldn't think, could only feel. He moved me back against the headboard, his body covering mine, and I realized I was shaking for real now. Not from fear, though there was some of that, but from anticipation, from the years of being alone, from the knowledge that this was irreversible. "I've got you," he murmured against my collarbone. "Let me have you. Let me have all of you." I don't remember undressing. I remember his hands on my body like they were reading a language I'd never known I spoke. I remember the moment he positioned himself and looked into my eyes, and I remember nodding, giving permission, understanding that this was the moment where I became his in a way that went beyond anything contractual or financial. He entered me slowly, giving my body time to adjust, and it hurt, a small burning sensation, but underneath the pain was pleasure, sensation, the overwhelming awareness of being filled by him, of being unable to tell where he ended and I began. "Okay?" he asked, stilled inside me. "Yes," I breathed. He moved then, and it was nothing like the desperate grabbing I'd somehow imagined. It was controlled and purposeful, and exquisitely slow. Every stroke was measured, designed to build something rather than rush toward completion. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my mouth, and I realized he was being gentle in a way that was more intense than anything rough could have been. Because this gentleness was a choice. This control was a gift. I started to move with him, and he caught my wrists not roughly, but firmly, and held them above my head. "Let me," he said. "You don't have to do anything. Just let me have this." So I did. I let him move inside me, let him set the pace, let him control everything, while I dissolved underneath him. I felt something building, pressure and pleasure mixing in a way that made me desperate and confused. And when he felt me tensing, he adjusted his angle and thrust deeper, and suddenly everything broke open inside me. I came with a sound I didn't recognize my own voice, raw and surprised. He followed moments later, his control shattering, pressing himself fully inside me and saying something in Italian that sounded like a prayer. Afterward, we lay tangled together, and he was careful with me in a way that felt like an apology. I started. "I know," he said, and kissed my temple. We stayed like that, his body curved around mine, his hand on my waist, until I drifted into sleep more complete than anything I'd experienced in the house until then. In the morning, when I woke, he was watching me sleep. The intimacy of it being observed without knowledge should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like devotion. "Good morning," he said softly. "Hi," I replied, feeling suddenly shy in the daylight, with him looking at me like I was something he'd been given and was afraid to break. "Come here," he said, and pulled me against him, and we started again slower this time, with fewer edges, more tenderness. By the time we were finished, I understood that what had happened in the night was him burning away his restraint, and what was happening now was him rebuilding connection with what was left behind. "I love you," I said, and meant it in a way that encompassed everything, the danger, the fear, the bloodstains on his hands. "I love you," he replied. "More than I should, more than is safe, but completely." My mother called on a Tuesday morning to tell me that everything was fine, that Liliana's physical therapy was proceeding beautifully, that she should be cleared for normal activity within the month. I celebrated by cooking Vittore's favorite meal, a dish his mother had taught him, which he'd taught me, which connected us all across time and death and the particular kind of eternity that happens when you learn something from someone you love and pass it forward. He came home early. This was unusual enough to set off alarm bells, but he kissed me at the door and said, "Early dinner. I want to spend time with you." "Is that a crime?" And I let myself relax. We were eating when the call came. I didn't hear it, but I saw him reach for his phone, saw his expression change like a light switch being turned off. He said something in Italian, listened, and then stood. "There's a situation at one of the warehouses, the one near the port." "Is it?" "It's contained, but I need to go." He was leaving again, and I'd thought naively. I realized now that we were past this, that the violence existed at some remove, somewhere I didn't have to think about it while we were together. I understood now that I was wrong. "Take someone with you," I said, Please. I will. Promise me you'll be careful. He looked at me with something like compassion. I can't promise that. Careful is a luxury I don't have access to anymore, but I promise I'll come back. After he left, I found myself standing in his study, looking at the maps and photographs and various papers that represented the architecture of his empire. I saw the warehouse in question marked with a red line, strategic location, high volume of goods, significant profit center. I understood that whatever was happening there, it was happening because of me. Because he had made me his, had shown vulnerability, had let himself be distracted by love. Someone had noticed. Someone had decided this was an opportunity to strike. The thought made me feel sick. I did something I'd been trained not to do. I waited, instead of occupying myself with distractions. I sat in the darkness of his study and imagined all the ways this could go wrong. And at 3 a.m, when there was a commotion in the front hall, I moved toward it instead of away from it. Waitress came through the door with his arms supported by one of his men, blood darkening the left side of his jacket. Not a lot, not enough to be immediately life-threatening, but enough to make it clear that someone had hurt him. Don't, he said, seeing me move toward him. I'm fine. You're bleeding. Superficial. A blade caught me when I wasn't paying attention. It's already been handled. But handled seemed to mean that the person responsible had been neutralized, because his security team was moving him toward the bathroom with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. How bad? I asked, following. You shouldn't see this, he said. I'm seeing it. They removed his jacket, his shirt, and there was a wound long but shallow, running along his ribs that was bleeding steadily, but without the arterial spray that would have indicated something truly serious. Still, watching them clean it, watching him stay completely still, watching the moment when pain flickered across his face before he suppressed it again, it was more real than any of the abstract danger had been. Who did this? I asked. The Calabrese family. They're making another move. Testing to see if my focus is divided. Is it? He turned to look at me, freshly bandaged, his torso bare, looking ancient and exhausted. Yes, he said simply. You're a divide. You're a break in my concentration. Every moment I'm with you is a moment I'm not thinking about territories or threats. I know this. They know this. And now they're trying to use it. The guilt should have been crushing. Instead, what I felt was clarity. A kind of terrible understanding that my presence in his life had created a liability that went both ways. Then I'll help, I said. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes. Tell me what I can do. Tell me how to be useful instead of just a handicap. He actually smiled a real smile, tinged with exhaustion. The fact that you think you need to fight to prove your worth is the most you've ever disappointed me, he said. Your worth isn't measured in battle strategy. Your worth is that you exist. That's enough. It's not, I said fiercely. Not if your enemies know where to find me. Not if I'm a walking target. I want to be part of this with you. I want to be someone they have to think twice about reaching. He stood and pulled me against him, and I felt blood against my skin, his blood. Or maybe some of it was from whoever he'd hurt at the warehouse, and it didn't matter anymore whether I could feel the danger or not. I was living inside it. I'd been living inside it since the moment he paid for Liliana's surgery. If you want to help, he said softly, then trust me. Trust that I've already calculated the cost of loving you. Trust that I've already decided it's worth paying. And trust that I'll move heaven and earth to make sure nothing happens to you because of what I am. What if you can't? The fear came out as a whisper. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. He pulled back just enough to look at me. But I can. I will. This is my world. And you're mine. And no one touches what belongs to Vittorio Russo without consequences. They can't survive. It should have been frightening, the possession in those words. The certainty that I belonged to him. Instead, it felt like freedom. Like finally having someone who would fight for me the way I'd been fighting for Liliana. That night, he made love to me carefully, mindful of his injury. And afterward he held me while I traced the bandaging on his ribs. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For bringing this into your life. For making you understand the reality of what it means to love someone like me. Don't apologize, I said. Just promise me you'll survive it. I promise, he said, and his arms tightened around me. It was a promise I hoped he could keep. The ceasefire lasted 3 weeks. During that time, Liliana came home. She was healed enough to move freely, though her physical therapist had given strict instructions about heavy activity. She moved through Vittore's house like she'd lived there her entire life, and he welcomed her with the kind of tenderness that made me understand how deeply both of them had been waiting for this. "Your home is very orderly," Liliana observed, making architectural notes in the sketchbook she always carried. "Yes, I don't like disorder. Does that make me dull?" "No," she said seriously. "It makes you intentional. There's a difference." They had a rapport, these two. Something that existed independent of my role in connecting them. Watching them, I understood that Vittore wasn't performing kindness toward my daughter. He was genuinely interested in her perspective, her designs, her particular brilliance. It made loving him easier and harder at the same time. Then the phone call came. It came during family dinner, something we'd started doing with ritual, the 3 of us around the table that had capacity for 12. Vittore took it, spoke briefly in Italian, and stood. "There's been a development," he said. "The Calabrese family has made an offer. A business proposition. I need to consider it." "What kind of proposition?" I asked. "The kind that would end the conflict. The kind that requires negotiation at high stakes." "How high?" I realized my hands were trembling. "The highest," he said quietly. "But it's still an opportunity." He left us there, and Liliana looked at me with the particular perceptiveness of a child who understands more than she should. "Is Vittore in danger?" she asked. "Yes," I said, not bothering to soften it. She deserved truth. "Always. But he's very careful." "I don't think he is," she said. "I think he's very distracted. Because of you and me. He wasn't distracted before, I don't think. And now he is." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Liliana said with a maturity that broke my heart. "Apologize to him, because he's choosing you anyway, and that's the bravest thing I've ever heard of." Vittore was gone for 2 days. During that time, I tried to work. Marco had agreed to take me back on a limited basis, but I was useless. My hands shook while pouring wine. I couldn't remember orders. On the second night, I made a mistake with a customer's food, and Francesca finally told Marco to send me home. "You're in love with him," she said, not as an accusation but as fact. "And he's going to either get you killed or get himself killed trying to protect you. Then I'll deal with it when it happens." "No, you won't," she said, and something in her voice made me look at her. "You'll disappear into grief and never come back. I've seen it before. Women who fall for men like him. There are only 2 endings. They become partners in his empire, or they become ghosts." I went home to the brownstone, to Liliana doing her homework, to the spaces Vittore had filled with his presence, and now left empty. He came back at dawn, and I knew immediately that something had changed. He looked different. The restraint was gone, not replaced by violence, but by something like peace. Like he'd made a decision and released the tension of deciding. "Come here," he said, and I moved into his arms, and he held me like he was anchoring me to the world. "What happened?" I asked. "I made an agreement with the Calabrese family. A partnership. They wanted territory, and I wanted..." He paused, and something flickered across his face. "I wanted time. Time with you. Time to exist as a person instead of a function." "What did you give them?" "Operational management of 3 of the southern warehouses, percentage of profit, and a boundary their territory, my territory, neutral spaces, where both families operate with mutual respect." "Why would they agree to that?" "Because I convinced them that my distraction, my love for you, is an advantage to both of us. A man with something to lose makes better business decisions than a man with nothing. They decided to benefit from my rationality. I didn't know whether to believe him, but I wanted to. I wanted this to be over." "So it's done?" I asked. "The fighting?" "The immediate threat is managed," he said carefully. "There will always be challenges, but for now, there's stability, and stability was all I needed." That night, with Liliana asleep, we made love slowly, thoroughly, like we were cementing something into place. "I want to ask you something," I said afterward, "and I want you to be completely honest. Always. Did you compromise your position for me? Did you give up something essential to keep me safe?" He was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said finally. Some might say the southern warehouses represent a loss of power, but they'd be wrong. Because what I gained is worth more than what I lost. What did you gain? He kissed my forehead. A reason to be more than what I was. A reason to negotiate instead of dominate. A reason to imagine a future that extends beyond my own mortality. That's not very practical, I said. No, he agreed. But it's real. 6 months later, Liliana was running again. Her physical therapist had cleared her completely, and she was a tornado of motion racing down hallways, leaping on furniture, practicing moves she was inventing for a sport that existed only in her imagination. Vittori watched her with the kind of attention that suggested he was committing these moments to memory. We'd moved into a new phase of life that I'd never anticipated, something that looked almost like normalcy. I'd transitioned from waiting tables to managing Rossini's, which meant the restaurant was becoming an extension of our home rather than a place I worked in fear. Vittori had introduced me to the business side of things, and I discovered I had an aptitude for it, for understanding what people wanted before they knew, for creating experiences that made them feel seen. Liliana had been enrolled in a specialized program for gifted children, one that focused on her architectural interests. She was thriving in a way that suggested the surgery hadn't just healed her spine, it had healed something in her soul. And Vittori and I had found a rhythm. There was still danger. He still took calls at midnight. There were still moments when I'd see him on the phone, his expression hardening into something unrecognizable. But there was also beauty the quiet mornings before anyone else woke, where he'd make breakfast in the kitchen his mother had loved, and we'd sit together without needing to speak. He'd moved his business office to the brownstone, which meant I saw him during the day, saw him in different contexts. I watched him negotiate with suppliers for the restaurants. I watched him study financial reports with the kind of focus that suggested he was calculating not just profit but advantage. I watched him be brilliant, and he watched me. It became clear, over those months, that I wasn't just existing in his life, I was becoming integrated into its infrastructure. I met people he did business with. I understood, increasingly, what his world actually contained. Some of it was legal. Most of it existed in the complicated gray spaces where power and economics met. I made my peace with that, because the alternative was losing him, and I'd rather know what darkness he carried than lose him trying to preserve ignorance. One evening, in late autumn, Vittori took me to a place I'd never been, a private club in the basement of a building downtown. It was opulent in a way that didn't advertise itself. Dark wood, leather, the smell of expensive liquor and old money. He introduced me to people, a judge, a city councilwoman, a businessman who owned half the port. They all knew who I was. More than that, they all understood what I represented, a woman who had chosen, eyes open, to bind herself to Vittori Russo. They're sizing me up, I said quietly, as we left. Yes. Am I passing? You're more than passing, he said. You're rewriting their calculations. They expected me to eventually discard you or compromise myself for you. Instead, you've made me more efficient. That terrifies them. Good, I said. He laughed, a real laugh, delighted and surprised. The proposal came on a night when snow was falling softly outside the brownstone's windows. We were in his study, ostensibly working me on restaurant budgets, him on something I didn't entirely understand and had learned not to ask about. He stood, stretched, and moved to look out at the snow. Marry me, he said. I didn't look up from my work. I'd learned that sometimes he tested me this way, said things to see how I'd respond. To what end? I asked. To the end of making this permanent. To the end of standing in front of people, God, a judge, your mother, the entire restaurant, and saying that you're mine, and I'm yours, and we're building something together. I'm already yours. I want it officially. I want documents. I want the law to recognize what we already know. I set my pen down and turned to face him. If I marry you, you understand what I'm binding myself to. Not just you, the man I love, but the empire, the danger, the choices that will require complicity. Yes. And you're asking me to do it anyway? Yes. I stood and walked to where he was standing, looking out at the snow. Then yes, I said. Yes, to all of it. He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple, elegant, diamond set in white gold, and slipped it on my finger. It fit perfectly, which suggested he'd been planning this for some time. The wedding was small, My mother, Liliana, standing beside me as a kind of proto-maid of honor, Vittori's uncle and several of his associates seated in the front row, a judge who was very obviously in Vittor's debt performing the ceremony. Liliana cried, which meant the wedding was a success. My mother looked terrified and accepting in equal measure. When I kissed Vittore, it tasted like promise and threat in equal measure. Vittori point of view. He had made calculations about this marriage, understood its strategic value beyond the emotional truth of it. A wife was stability. A wife was a sign that he wasn't planning a dramatic exit from power. A wife was a statement that he was building a legacy. But when Enza stood before him in the white dress her mother had helped her choose, when he saw the fear and love mingling in her eyes, when he understood that she was choosing this fully aware of what it meant, all the calculation fell away. He loved her. Not strategically. Completely. It was the most dangerous thing he'd ever allowed himself to feel. He'd made arrangements, of course. Contingencies for every scenario where her life might be threatened. Safeguards, securities, people positioned to protect her with his empire's full resources. But there was one scenario he couldn't protect against. The one where his own choices caught up with him. Where the violence he'd done, the lines he'd crossed, the enemies he'd made, they came for him, not to destroy him, but to destroy what he loved. That scenario kept him awake sometimes. That scenario made him hold her tighter than was reasonable. But he'd made peace with it, because the alternative was never having known her. And now that he had, emptiness seemed like the only other option. So he would protect her. He would build her a life where she could move freely, love openly, exist without the constant weight of his world on her shoulders. He would make himself into the kind of man who deserved a woman like her. He might fail. He probably would fail, at least partially, but he would try. For her. Epilogue. The shadow remains. 6 months into our marriage, I discovered the contingency plans. I was looking for something in Vittore's office, a document about restaurant insurance, when I found the folder. It was labeled with my name, and inside were detailed plans, safe houses, bank accounts I didn't know existed, documents of ownership transferred to my name, instructions for Liliana's protection and care, should something happen to him. There were also letters, sealed envelopes with my name written in his careful hand. I didn't open them. I couldn't. Instead, I walked into his office and set the folder on his desk. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked. He looked at the folder, then at me, and I could see him calculating how to respond. "Someday," he said, "when I thought you could handle it without fear. I can handle knowing that you think you might die. I can handle that you're preparing for your own mortality. What I can't handle is the lying." "Then I'll stop," he said simply. "I'll tell you everything, every contingency, every enemy, every threat. You want that?" "Yes, even though it will terrify you?" "Especially because it will terrify me," I said. "Because we're partners now. Because whatever danger is in your life is in mine, and I need to know it completely." He stood and came around the desk and pulled me against him. "You're braver than I could ever be," he said. "No," I replied, "just more terrified, but I'm not running." That night, he told me about the men still hunting him, about the families that hadn't forgotten what he'd done to the Calabrese operations, about the federal investigation that had been ongoing for 3 years, coming no closer to actual prosecution, but existing nonetheless. He told me about the safeguards he'd put in place, the people he'd paid off, the politicians who owed him favors. He told me about the parts of his empire that would persist even if he disappeared. And when he was done, I understood. Marriage to him was marriage to a man at war with forces I couldn't fully comprehend. It was choosing to live with constant uncertainty, with the knowledge that any day, everything could change. But it was also choosing to be loved with an intensity that few people ever experienced. To be protected, valued, cherished beyond measure. It was choosing danger and devotion in equal measure. I was choosing it anyway. Liliana turned 10 in the spring after our wedding. She had her surgery scar, a long line along her back that she was learning to be proud of, rather than ashamed of. She had her dreams of buildings, and she had Vittore, who'd become the closest thing to a father she'd ever known. She also had the understanding emerging slowly, the way children understand dangerous things, that her mother had married into a world of shadows and power, that her mother had chosen this. I wasn't sure if she forgave me for it, but I was certain she understood it. One afternoon, while she was at school and Vittori was in meetings, I sat in the library of the brownstone and looked at the ledgers, the real ledgers, the ones hidden behind false panels, the ones that documented an empire built on compromise and calculation, and the particular kind of genius that could operate in darkness without losing its humanity entirely. I could have walked away. Even now, even married, even bound to him by law and love and the weight of what we'd built together, I could have walked away. Instead, I turned the page and began to understand the architecture of his world. Because if I was going to live in it, I wanted to know all of it. I wanted to know exactly what I'd chosen, and I wanted to make sure that choice never became a regret.